In this episode, we're going to focus on the DAW, Digital Audio Workstation, how to properly get on stage, how to organize your workflow, and how to make the best out of your recordings. First, workflow. Sounds obvious, but you need to find the way that best works for you. What I mean by that is try different DAWs. I use Ableton and Pro Tools, for example. I know Dave uses Nuendo, right, Dave?
Yeah, Nuendo or Cubase, they're basically the same workstation.
So one of the first things to do is to explore different platforms. There's Ableton, Pro Tools, Nuendo, Cubase, other more affordable platforms like Reaper. But at the end of the day, you need to make your choice. Again, explore, find what best works for you.
It's interesting that with workstations, the idea of workflow, and I think what do we mean by workflow, is a process of getting through getting the process of going onto into the DAW on the disk, and that's and the thing is, the interesting thing is I believe that there is no right or wrong process. There is your process. And he was talking about the idea of Ableton, for example. I find it really interesting with, especially with Ableton, because it is a musician tool. It is a recording tool. It is a production tool. It is many different kind of tools. And I've always sort of said that if you get a room full of people and say, okay, you guys learn Ableton, and it's really interesting that every single one of them might come up with a different way of using that tool. It's I use Ableton for as a pre-production tool and as an on-stage tool, and I've never met anybody that uses Ableton in the way that I do. And so that's really interesting. So I think, that idea of the workflow and approach to working with a workstation, it's called your workflow and what works best for you.
That's a very good point, what you touch on, which is as well, I think it's depending on what you do. For example, I know a lot of hip hop and rap producers, they use something called FL Studio, which is more beat oriented DAW. In the other hand, in most of professional recording studios around the world, they actually use Pro Tools. It's a more, let's say, recording-based DAW. As of when you record bands, orchestras, singer-songwriters, or more than basically one microphone at the time. It's kind of the hardest recorder of choice by all the studios in the world. So like Dave said, find your own way. And the only way to find your way is by doing. So start doing.
So start doing. Absolutely. And it is really cool about that idea of multiple DAWs. With as that idea of, like I said, I used Ableton for pre-production. That is, and I'm an electronic musician, and I will use it for loops, for audio to MIDI, for taking MIDI to audio and audio to MIDI. There's nothing better than it. However, for mixing and for actual production, that I personally go into Cubase Nuendo. And I think the idea of using multiple workstations for each, as long as you don't go too, as long as you don't go too crazy with the idea of, you can take the strengths of each one, if that works for you, or work within a single DAW. It does really, again, it's totally up to you. What is workflow? And workflow is the way that you approach your process. And are you in the studio engineer? Are you an electronic musician? Are you a hip hop artist? Are you working solo? Are you working with other people? And so I think that idea of workflow, particularly many of us work in home studios, and that really gives you affords you to do it your own way, to start a certain way, start with loops, start with a beat, start with whatever the process is for beginning, and build things up in your own way. So there's a musical workflow, and then there's also the technical workflow. And getting into the and getting in the musical workflows, that's super fluid. I mean, that is your bag. That's your thing. On the technical side, is which we can actually touch on, is basically starting in on the technical side. Is one thing would be, how do you arrange your session? How do you arrange the way that things are built out in the DAW, the way that the tracks are? Do you start with the bass? Do you move on to the drums? Do you move on to other things? And the process that you choose to work with. And the other thing within that is the idea of what makes things easier. I find that using color is, and I think most people would find that using color is really quite useful. I will use blues for bass sound. This is totally arbitrary. I will use blues for heavier bass sound. I will use reds or red oranges for percussion and drums and all of that stuff. I tend to just, for example, use yellow for live acoustical instruments. So that's just my personal thing. And I will use color to help out in a lot of ways. What's a way that you might approach it?
I used to use colors more than I do now. I structure the sessions within folders, especially in Pro Tools or in groups in Ableton. Visually, I'm not that crazy on coloring, because to my brain, different colors actually make me more, not distracted, but makes my process more loud, if that makes any sense. It's like the more color information I process through my eyes, the less space I have for my ears. This might sound strange. Yes. So I'm not crazy about coloring. I'm mostly very keen on organizing, as of drums always on top, then bass, then acoustic guitars, then pianos, then electric guitars, then synths, and then vocals. Vocals always are at the bottom of the session or at the right side of the mixing view.
Just going to say, that's just the really wonderful thing, is that everybody has their own way of doing it.
When I used to work as an assistant, I will have to basically comply to whoever I was working for and whatever choices they had, and that taught me a lot of different things, which is everyone works very different and there is no one way to do things. But what that allowed me is to actually pick and choose the things that I like from everyone's workflow and basically disregard what I did not like. One of the main things I took on that, it's organizing and creating copies as of Save As. Basically having a timeline of a progress of the project in your Save As structure. For example, if I start a mix, I start with a letter called B1. That's because of one of the mentors I had that used to do that. And then before I get comments from a client, I go B1, B2, B3, in every major change that I do, now I mix the drums, now the vocals. And whenever I have a mix note from a client, I already have I change the letter from B to M. But it still is a small letter. Whenever the mix is finished, I put a capital letter and then the number, and that's the master session for the final mix.
That is so cool. I've never heard you ever say that. That's really cool. For me, one of the things that's really neat, you mentioned a few sentences back the idea of organization-wise. I just want to jump back for a second to the idea of folders, because that's a really, really important one. Is the idea of folders within the session. Drums, you can have certain drums within a folder, and that folder can be collapsed or opened up. There could be all these tracks that can be collapsed down or opened up. And with folders, that organizational idea of putting things into vocals, drums, keyboards, however you want to put that organization within folders, that is a really, really important way of organizing. And I know that we all use, at least E and I use folders, and that's really cool. I have never heard you talk about the idea of how you organize the names of your mix versions and all that, and I found that really interesting. What I do actually, and so I use folders within the session, putting tracks into folders, but I will also use directories or folders within the session on the computer. And in the session within the computer, organizational wise, I find that putting directories or folders to be really, really important. And you talked about the idea of different mix versions. I, for example, in the folder of song XY, song XY, and in that I will have song XY mix back. It's early. Mix back. MIXBAK. That's just what I do. And I will have, instead of all the different versions being within the session, you see all these different versions, I will actually just take the earlier versions and put them into mix back. And so that the version that I'm working on is always the current version. I have now taken a different way, and it's interesting because I've taken a different way where I will go I will be working on the mixes, and it will be such and such. It can get like mix 40 or whatever, and then when I get to the final version, I will just go fin, the French fin, fin, final, and so it'll be final, and then in recent times, because I am such a things can creep through a mix, and I've just learned so importantly the importance of quality control, and of doing a final listen through. Is this right? And I've never done quality control in the way that, to the extent that I'm working on now, and so I will go FINQC, which literally means it is finished and it has been through quality control. It is done. And, and I've never done anything to that level.
I like to talk about gain staging. We talked about that several times, Dave, in the past, where we live in a time, I think we're very, very lucky, because mostly any audio interface in the market will have at least 24-bit recording for conversion. As of like the analog to digital converter is going to be 24-bit. There's actually 32-bit basically chips right now, which from a technical point of view might make not so much let's say gains against a 24-bit, but that's for another video. But long story short, we have incredible headroom, incredible signal to noise ratio, and great quality of analog to digital recording. Once that it's out of the way, we have to think that what's the best way to capture our music, our sound from the microphone to the computer. We have great interfaces, but how can we maximize and best use the qualities of our tools in order to have the best product? One of the ways that I like to think about is, for example, if you're recording an acoustic guitar, just go to the loudest section of your song and imagine, like, if you have your DAW with a dB full scale meter, if you play the basically loudest part of your song, I would say don't go anywhere above like -6 dB, just to not have any clips if you really dig in. But as well, I would say don't record too low, because while you have great A to D converters, why not try to like make the best? And if you record too low, you're gonna raise the noise floor a bit. So as a rule of thumb, try to record in a healthy level. To the actual user nowadays, you have even color coding meterings in your DAW and your interfaces, and if you read the manuals, they're gonna say stay between green and yellow, don't go near the red, which is a very, very useful rule of thumb. So we have the best gain, staging, and levels going to the DAW, so we can actually work in the most optimal way when we are working in the box. What are your thoughts regarding that, Dave?
It's really interesting. Completely agree. And what's really interesting for me is, again, especially for those who've lived through the analog era, it's just so, that idea, oh, let's push it and make it sound better. And, on tape, you can push it and make it sound better to a degree. Digital, you can push it and it won't sound better. But that mentality of let's go into the red, let's make it just a little bit, and also the flip side of that is, oh, the technology today is so good that it's forgiving and that it doesn't matter. And I have found, and so in the past, gain staging was just not one of my. It was like, okay, it's going to be forgiving, I'll let it forgive, and that I found was just completely wrong. That one does have to deal with gain staging. One does have to, and what E was just talking about of pushing it, but not pushing it too hard, and that idea of -6 or just literally staying clear of the red is so very, very important. And so I have fallen victim to the idea of, okay, that we can let things get away. Red is okay, and it's not. So that idea of literally watching your P's and Q's as you go through and watching the different stages and how to maximize, that is what gain staging means, is to maximize your levels throughout each process in this case, within the digital chain. So moving on from that, if, for example, I use grouping, so in addition to the idea of folders, I will actually group instrument types, etc., into a group session, which I will put off to the left-hand side, and those groups would be there. So how do your levels, your overall track levels, then conform to the idea of the group levels? Are those out of balance? That idea is to get them basically into balance so that you're maximized all the way through. So that's just, it's so that through, it's literally, again, it's the audio chain. You're running through that critical idea of the audio chain that is in the book that's stressed so much, can never be overstressed. It's like whenever there's a weak link in the chain, that's where it's all going to fall. So you basically want to keep those links all strong, from your input levels through to your group levels, through to your output levels, and following all the way through. To finish this out, there's one more idea that I'd like to get across regarding gain staging, and that is the idea of plugins. When we put plugins into a session, in a DAW session, they're basically these little boxes. When you press on those little boxes, then the actual device comes up. But when you unpress them, that device goes away. And it's easy to forget that they're there. And with gain staging, you want to make sure that such and such a plugin is not being overloaded. Again, that idea of going through the chain. And plugins are definitely in the chain. And so even though something is not staring you in the face, you want to be really aware that it's there, and occasionally pull them up, take a look at it, And again, this gets back to the idea of workflow, because after a while, all of this, when you start doing good practices, then all of a sudden that idea of workflow and that idea of following through becomes part of your practice, becomes part of your workflow. And then all of a sudden you're starting, oh yeah, that's happened before. I'm aware of that level mismatch within that plugin. And you start paying attention to the details. So that's just really, really cool, and really, really important to look at. It's not always just the things that are staring you in the face. Quite often it is those things that are under the hood. One of the things that I would really has popped up through this is the fact that Emiliano and I, we bounce off of each other. And I just love that. I think it's so important to know that everybody is different. Everybody works in their own way. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, I've never seen that before. I didn't know you worked that way. And again, you get different viewpoints. And that whole, I think that's an important part about this site, is not, this is my way and this is the way you should do it. This is not the point. It's to find your own way and work with your own art form. And that's really, really the cool part. So just wanted to say thank you for watching the video. My name is David Miles Huber. Emiliano Caballero's on the other side. He's in Spain right now. And we just really appreciate your watching with us, growing with us. Obviously, we're just getting started with all this and learning our way. So we appreciate your patience with that. So we look forward to talking to you again next time. Thank you so much. Bye.